My name is Sandra. I'm 39 years old. I have 4 beautiful children, and I'm a recovering heroin addict. Growing up in my household, my dad was an alcoholic. He worked every day. He was what you would call a functioning alcoholic. My mother was an amazing woman. She took in her sister's children for whatever reason. So we had a very extended family growing up. There were some issues as far as my dad and my mom would work completely opposite shifts. And with my dad being an alcoholic, there was some sexual abuse going on in the home. So my way to deal with that was I decided to get married at 16. My marriage was great for a long time. We had our first child. At a very early age, I started smoking marijuana at the age of 11, and my disease started progressing then, but I didn't realize at the time I had a problem. So I had my first daughter, and we decided that we were going to sell marijuana in order to be able to smoke every day, to smoke as much as we wanted. And we did that for a while, and that worked. And then we eventually progressed to selling crack. At that point in time, I wasn't smoking crack. I had no clue what it was. I didn't even realize how much money we were making. I didn't realize that we were selling pounds and pounds of weed. And I was just staying at home being the stay-at-home mom while my children's dad was running our so-called business, so to speak. Eventually, we had our second child, still selling drugs. We were working as well, but working didn't bring in enough money, so we pushed drugs to make ends meet so I could stay at home with the kids. Eventually, we got busted for selling drugs. DEA, FBI kicked our door in. They came in an ambulance to do that. And that was not expected for us. So at that point in time was the first time social workers came into our lives. I ran from them. We moved to another city. They couldn't find us, so that case kind of got dropped. I went to jail. I got back out. My husband originally took the charges, so he served some time in prison for that. And I continued to smoke. I continued to use. Eventually, my disease took me to pills. Started doing pills on a regular basis. And I was doing very well at my job. I worked all the time. I was maintaining. Things were good. We had 3 kids at this point, and I decided to take a better position, and we decided to move to Georgia. So we did at that point, and that's where we were introduced to cocaine. Cocaine was a whole nother level for us. My husband was constantly gone. I was at work. I'd be stuck at work. We had 2 vehicles, but being new to the area, I had no idea where I was at, so he would come pick me up from work. And I'll never forget being abandoned at work and having no way home, and the police had to take me home twice. And he and I started fighting all the time. The lifestyle that came with cocaine was a little bit different, so I decided to leave at that point. When I found out my mother had breast cancer, I just couldn't stay in Georgia anymore with everything that was going on in my life, so I left. I left Georgia and decided to come back to Kentucky and be able to help my mother as much as I could. So when I moved back home, our disease just kept going. We thought we were going to be able to stop doing cocaine, but that wasn't the case. We had actually set up to rob a very good friend of ours who was a big-time dealer, so we robbed him, acted like we had no clue. That's where our disease took us. We acted like we had no clue. We took him into our home, while the entire time it was us that did the robbery. And that's something I'm not proud of today, but it's something that we did, and that's just exactly where our disease took us. So eventually, 19 years down the road, my husband and I, we had 4 kids at this point, decided to separate. He found someone. At that point, I was trying to get sober, and he was not. So I knew in order to change my life, I had to change some things, and if he wasn't willing to change with me, then it was time for me to move on. So my mom died in 2008, and that was the beginning of a whole nother hell that I had never known. That was when I started using heroin. Heroin made me to where I couldn't function every day. I couldn't go to work because I was sick. In the beginning, it wasn't that way. I was still working, but eventually my money ran out. So I had to figure out ways to get high. And I used justification of my mother dying for a long time to continue using. I'll never forget the day that she died. I don't even remember her funeral. I just remember that I was really high and I didn't want to be there at that point. My mom was my best friend. I've always been an addict, but on the day that my mom died, I just didn't want to live. I wanted to go wherever she was at because I knew my life was forever going to be changed because she was gone. And my mom was usually my bailout person. She knew I had a problem. She always encouraged me to go see a doctor, go see a counselor, get on some meds, be a better mom. And when she was gone, I didn't have that anymore. So eventually heroin took me to where I lost everything. I lost my kids. I lost my home. I lost my cars. I lost everything in my home. And I honestly didn't care. I didn't want to live anymore. I'd given up on myself. I'd given up on my kids. I'd given up on anyone in my life that loved me. And my new love was the love of the drug. At that point, I started robbing because I didn't have money. I tried to maintain different times working, but eventually I would be robbing my job until I would get so scared that I knew if I didn't quit, I was going to be in trouble. I was going to catch a charge. So I would quit. If I had a car, I would junk my car just so I could get high because I didn't want to be sick. And eventually I met a man that I thought loved me, and I know now he was my using buddy. And that man eventually beat me all the time. And it was such a crazy relationship that I don't understand how I stayed that long, but that's where the drug took me. There was point in times when if we were sick, he would make me go out and trick so that I could earn enough money so we could get well for the day. I know today a husband doesn't do that. A husband wouldn't make you go out and sell yourself for money no matter what the situation is. But I did. I did exactly everything he told me to because I knew if I didn't, I was going to be beaten. I was going to be homeless. And it was easier to do it with him than to do it alone. So eventually, I do have a business mentality. So eventually I thought that instead of going out and robbing stores and putting myself in bad situations and having to go out and prostitute myself, I thought it was okay to start prostituting my friends. So that's what I did. I started prostituting the people that I hung out with. I built a clientele base with a few other ladies. And at one point, my kitchen was like a call-in center where we would be on chat lines and we would get different guys. We would suck them in and we would, different girls would trick with them for money. So I kind of turned that into a little bit of a business for a while, and the whole time thinking it was okay. So I guess I became a madam at that point. So then I evolved my, so to speak, business a little farther, and I thought, well, I'll just start buying the drugs so I could sell it to the girls that were tricking, because then I could make more money. And I did that for a while, and there were 2 different occasions where I had been allegedly doing these things, so I would stop for a minute so that way I didn't get caught, because that's a big charge. That's a prostitution ring that I was running. So I would stop long enough to get the attention off of me, and then I went back to doing it. And eventually my drugs led me to jail. I'll never forget the day, August the 18th, 2015. I was, at that point in time, my addiction had gone to banging meth and heroin each and every day. My habit was pretty up there. I was doing 1 to 2 grams of meth and 1 to 2 grams of heroin on a daily basis. And I knew I had to sell a lot of drugs to make this happen. So I was in and out of Cincinnati all the time. That was my life. I didn't have a life. I didn't see my kids as much as I should. I would make, a few hours one time a week just to go see them. And to me, I thought that was enough. My kids at this time had been bounced around from home to home to home because 4 kids is a lot for one person to take care of, and I wasn't paying child support. So my kids bounced around, and in order to keep them together, if one kid didn't get along with someone, I would place them with someone else, or, it just cost money to take care of them. So I didn't see at the time what I was doing to my kids. My youngest son, at 3 months old, I relapsed. I had been doing really good, and he got taken from me at that point. And I didn't even, I cared, but I didn't care. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to stop using. I didn't know how to start putting the pieces back together. So the day that I went to jail was the best day of the rest of my life, so to speak. When I got stopped for trafficking. I remember them taking me down to the detention center, and they were trying to get me to tell on people, and they tried to bribe me and say, well, if you tell on this person or give us some names, you won't get in trouble. And smart one me says, no one buys drugs in Kentucky. Everyone goes to Ohio to get them. So that cop looked at me, he said, well, good, that's interstate trafficking now. So I was facing 30 years at that point, scared to death, thinking I'm going to spend the rest of my life in jail, and I'd never done more than a few days at a time in jail, maybe a week at the most. And those were all minor charges for shoplifting at the time. So I'm in jail, and that's where I started detoxing, and that's where I really started praying to God to help me. 40 days in jail, I ended up going to a wonderful treatment center called Crossroads Recovery Center. I remember going back to see the judge after I was in the treatment center, and she said, I don't know who released you, but they messed up. So my attorney begged for her to let me stay, and she agreed and said, since I was already there, she was going to allow me to stay. It was a 4-month program. I stayed the whole time. It was a faith-based program, but I learned more there than I had in all the times that I was trying to get sober. I'd been in and out of treatment centers since 2010. That was the beginning of my journey, trying to recover, and I would get it for a moment, but then it would slip away. And I think that it was because I didn't know anything about a relationship with God. People kept talking about this God, and I had no understanding, and I wasn't doing what was recommended. I wasn't reaching out, or I wasn't praying. And at Crossroads, it was a different scenario. I learned how to pray, and I learned how to communicate with Him. And I learned that we had to do it on a daily basis. So I ended up staying 4 months. Throughout that point, I was doing my whole court case, and I was just trusting in God that no matter what, He was going to get me through it. And I left my whole entire case up to Him. And I remember the attorney saying, I need you to sign this plea. And I said, I can't do that, sir. And he was like, are you serious? And he probably thought I was crazy, but I said, I'm tired of controlling my life, so I'm leaving it up to God. So I said, I want a right to argue my case. And the judge, actually, when I tried to argue, she said, you lost your right to argue with interstate trafficking. We don't do that anymore. So I knew at that point I was to sign the 5-year deal they were offering me. On March 9th, 2015, I had to turn myself back into jail. That was one of the hardest things, thinking I'm going to be there for 5 years. But I knew the whole time God said it's going to be okay. And my attorney had said, I'm going to file for shock probation for you. So I sat in jail 4 months. That was the freest I ever felt, being locked up behind closed doors at that point in time. In jail, I was one of the busiest people that I know. I continued to do whatever I could for other people, whether it was helping them write something or just doing their nails. Anything that I could do to get outside of myself to help someone, I was doing. I would do Bible study twice a day. I started AA meetings in there. I just simply wanted to help people because I know how it feels to come into jail and be sick and feel hopeless and to not have anyone on the outside to help. And then 4 months in, I found out I was being released on shock. I was released on 4th of July, which was Independence Day. That was a very scary day for me. I didn't know where I was going from there. I knew I wanted to go back to Indiana to the treatment center I was at. I didn't want to stay in Kentucky because that's where everyone was that I knew. That was where I got into trouble. That was where, I grew up. So I desperately wanted to stay sober, and I knew I had been doing really well. So when I went to see my probation officer, he had different plans. So from there, I went to a sober living house called Reset Ministries. It's also a faith-based sober living house. And I learned a whole nother type of love on the streets other than a treatment center. The ladies there were amazing. The coaches that they give you to work with you were amazing. And I learned to live on a daily basis outside of jail, being sober, having a safe place to go home to and vent to. It's definitely been a struggle because a lot of the things that I've done, I hurt so many people in my past that everybody was just done. And I don't blame them. They didn't want anything to do with me. They didn't want to get close to me because they were afraid that I would relapse. Usually I would hit the year mark and then that was it for me. For some reason, I would relapse. And I've learned that was a trigger for me. A year is a trigger for me, and I knew I had to be careful when I hit a year. So during that time, I'm fighting for visitation of my kids, to see them. My life's been truly different since then. My oldest son is in the Navy. I got to be there for that. Had I been still using, I wouldn't have. I now have custody of my 5-year-old son, and I get to raise him the way that I want to, the way a good Christian should raise their kids. I'm still learning today, but I'm real grateful for where I'm at. I'm a different type of mother today. My kids, I see how much I hurt them, and I'm very open to them talking about things that I've done because I know that helps me. My kids have been drug around throughout my addiction. I've been in addiction for 26 years. That's more than half of my life. And I didn't even realize it until I touched heroin that I had a problem. But now I know that I definitely had a problem starting from the age of 11 and how far it's progressed and how far it's taken me. I used to be a very angry, resentful person. I hated my life and the person that I was. And I remember just not wanting to live anymore. And I had those feelings quite often. I remember going to the psychiatrist and him saying I was bipolar and I suffered from depression. And I don't suffer from depression. Maybe I'm a little bipolar today, but I learned to cope with it without taking meds because meds are a trigger for me also. Today I just strive to be a better person. I help with an organization called Unchained Praises. It's a great ministry, and it's a lot of hard work, but it's what's helping me stay sober. And this 2017-2018 school year, I'm very excited because my son also walks alongside me doing ministry, and we're excited to be able to have opportunities to go into schools and not just share my story, but for him to share his story on how my drugs have affected his life. Because when I was involved in drugs and I was using heroin and I was not caring about my kids, my son didn't want to live either. How I acted affected him in every way, as well as all my kids. Today my kids have hope and they're proud of their mom. They're proud of the person that I am today, and I watch my kids grow as I grow. Addiction, a lot of people don't understand it, but it's just like you having your coffee every day, or you having your cigarette every day, or you having to go work out. Imagine taking the one thing that you care about the most and having it taken from you and you not being allowed to have it every day without picking it back up. It's pretty hard to do. So for an addict, a normal day for you could be a really hard thing for us to do. I'm still learning about myself today because of the things of my past, especially with the prostitution deal. I struggle with men. I struggle with trusting them. I've heard a lot of sick and perverted things in my time, so there's a lot of trust issues there. So that's something that I have to work on. I know that a man can love a woman unconditionally, but for me, I struggle with that. I use every day as a day to grow. I constantly take my inventory. I'm not the best person in the world today, but I strive to be a better person. When the pastor at church had asked me if I would help with the middle school kids and assisting with Bible study, that meant the world to me when it might just not mean that much to someone else. It's the little things in life, and it's seeing how far I've come and how much I've grown, and to be able to continue sharing hope with people. When someone calls and they're struggling, I'm there and I try to do it quickly, because if I wait an hour, they might get high. That's just how it is. We don't have days to wait. And people are sincerely dying. Every day I hear of 1, 2, sometimes more people that have OD'd, because everything in my life is recovery today. That's what works for me. I can't go a day without knowing that I am an addict, and I have to actively do something to be a part of the solution and not the problem. So I just want to let everyone know, if you're struggling and you're trying to stay sober, you have to keep at it. We may fall 1, 2, 7 times in my case, but eventually you'll find something that works for you. Some people say it's AA, some people say it's NA, some people say it's CR, some people say it's God. It doesn't matter, but we have to find what works for us, because what might work for someone else might not work for the next person. So we just have to encourage people to find a recovery plan that will work for you. I did get certified as a peer support specialist to be able to work with people and build recovery plans. That's something that helps me as much as it helps the other person. A lot of people say to me, "You're crazy. Why do you do all this stuff for free?" But I have to do it to stay sober. That's what works for me, is getting outside of myself and helping other people. I don't do it for the money. I do it because I love people today, because I used to be that girl that just hated people. I was the girl that was going to rob you. I was the girl that was going to rob you and help you look for your stuff. That's just how I was. I was fighting all the time, thought it was cool to beat someone up. That's not cool. So I had to learn a whole new way of thinking. I had to learn why I thought the way I thought and change a whole lot of things about myself. And number 1 is I have to pray every day. And I have to learn to pray for I had to learn to pray for other people, because that helps me as much as it helps them. So I hope my story helps someone. And from a once struggling addict, Sandra Sexton Jones.